and listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Cosmic Catastrophe on the #1 listener-supported internet radio, Revolution Radio. And you can find us at revolution.radio in Studio B every day at 12, Saturday, 12 Mountain Time. You can also see the replay on our YouTube channel, Magnetic Reversal News, that evening at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. So check it out. Today's episode is going to be an airburst of activity, and we're going to be talking about cometary airbursts, and specifically how they may be one of the largest threats to the planet Earth. I think we've got top three. Solar flares or super flares that take out the grid is in the top three. Cometary airburst or cometary impact is number 2, and a VEI-7 eruption. Any of those three things that I just said are possible devastating events on Earth that will end the empire and reset the planet. Today, we're going to be talking about one of those specific events, namely an event that happened around 3,600 years ago. And it may, in fact, have been written about in the Bible. And we are going to be talking about the destruction of Sodom and Jericho, potentially. Now, scientists have found evidence of a cosmic airburst event in 1650 BCE, supposedly. The evidence is very clear and very apparent, and we'll go over it in the second half of the show. We're going to go over the scientific papers and the wealth of evidence that they have to support this idea. So back to the idea. Scientists have found evidence of a cosmic airburst event around 1650 BCE that devastated the ancient city of Tal el-Haman. And this is in the southern Jordan Valley. It caused extreme temperatures and depositing high concentrations of salt as well. This event, potentially inspiring the biblical tales of Sodom and Jericho's destruction, might also have led to mass abandonment of cities in the region during the late Bronze Age gap. Now, that's a fascinating scientific hypothesis, and so we should start digging right in to the information. And the information in question is, did a cosmic airburst wipe out parts of the Middle East 3,700 years ago? Well, before we get to the story and to the scientific papers and the analysis, let's talk about what we know about cometary airbursts. There is a plethora of information about impacts all around the Earth over the last, let's say, 10, 20,000 years, specifically during the Younger Dryas. There's events prior to that. We've got the Dakhla glass in the western desert of Egypt. And the abstract of the paper describing the glass says that impact cratering is a ubiquitous geologic process on the terrestrial planets. So we know that impacts happen all the time. These meteorite impact craters are the most visible product of impact events. But there is growing recognition that large aerial bursts or air bursts should occur relatively frequently through geologic time. And we have evidence in the form of the Dakhla glass in Western Egypt. We've also discussed on this channel the Hopewell airburst event, which may have eliminated the Hopewell culture due to comet airbursts around 1,700 years ago. We also spoke of widespread gases generated by cometary fireballs during the late Pleistocene in the Atacama Desert. Multiple locations showing melt glass and platinum, microspherules, and other evidence of cosmogenic origin, but no impacts. So, We also have seen with our own eyes, have we not, the Chelyabinsk meteor event on February 15th, 2013 at 9:20 a.m., a gigantic fireball entered Earth's atmosphere and exploded over Chelyabinsk in Russia. The asteroid responsible for the event was about 20 meters or 66 feet wide, entered the atmosphere at a relatively shallow angle with a speed of about 70,000 kilometers per hour or 42,000 miles per hour. And when it hit Earth's atmosphere, it began to burn up. And shortly before it impacted Earth, it exploded about 19 miles above the surface. The explosion created a flash that was briefly brighter than the sun, and a shockwave that is estimated to have released the same amount of energy as 500 kilotons of TNT, which is around 30 times more energy than the atomic bomb from Hiroshima. Now, luckily, this was in an unpopulated area and a relatively small event. If we compare it to the Tunguska event, which happened in June 30th, 1908, this cometary airburst flattened some 2,000 square kilometers, or 500,000 acres, charring more than 100 square kilometers of pine forests near the Tunguska River in central Siberia, very near the Chelyabinsk location. The explosion in this case is estimated to have been equivalent to the explosive force of 15 megatons of TNT. That's 30 times larger than the Chelyabinsk event. That's a big event. Now, what if this event were to happen, like the Tunguska event were to happen over a major city like London or New York or LA? The destruction would be unequal. The Tunguska event was so significant that if it were to hit a major city, the losses would be catastrophic. Hundreds of thousands of deaths. It would take years to recover. And it would potentially darken the skies and affect weather. A 15 megaton airburst at an entry angle of 35 degrees with a superheated plume of gas and fragments that reached the surface at hypervelocities. So a big enough event, an event like Tunguska, would literally blow apart a city and melt it, generating temperatures in excess of 2,000 degrees. So these are the types of significant events we're talking about. And they're not infrequent. I have a chart up here on the screen which shows dozens of events in the last 2 decades that we're aware of that are cometary airbursts or exploding asteroids, whatever you want to call them. And the equivalent size. An event on September 3rd in 2004 was greater than 20 kilotons, and it exploded over the Southern Ocean. Another large event, a month later in 2004, was 10 to 20 kilotons, and that exploded over the Indian Ocean. December 9th of 2006, a 20 kiloton object exploded over Egypt. On October 8th, 2009, a 20-plus kiloton object exploded over South Sulawesi in Indonesia. Are you picking up the picture? In February 15th, 2013, larger than 20 kiloton object exploded over Chelyabinsk. That's estimated at 50 kilotons, the Chelyabinsk. And objects are exploding over Earth all the time. It's just a matter of time and place when they line up and bad things happen. Just like in Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, what exactly is Sodom and Gomorrah and the depiction and the story in the Bible? Well, we'll get to that. And we're also going to discuss if the evidence that we show you is sufficient to support the theory that a meteor blast caused biblical destruction 3,700 years ago or 3,600 years ago. Now, in the Middle Bronze Age, about 3,600 years ago or 1650 BCE, the city of Tal el-Hammam was ascendant. It was located on high ground in the southern Jordan Valley, northeast of the Dead Sea. The settlement in its time had become the largest continuously occupied Bronze Age city in the southern Levant, having hosted early civilizations for thousands of years. At the time, it was 10 times larger than Jerusalem and 5 times larger than Jericho. It's an incredibly important cultural area, much of where the early cultural complexity of humans developed in this general area. Many of you know of Gobekli Tepe and other significant regions like Sanliurfa that may be the cradle of humanity, or simply the restructuring of it after the Younger Dryas catastrophe. And that is our opinion, that large groups of people survived in the Levant after the Younger Dryas event and built Gobekli Tepe and those shrines as a warning to future civilizations of what happened 11,500 years ago and 12,900 years ago. 2 significant events. But the event in question here happening at Tal el-Hammam is more recent, at just 3,600 years ago. What in the world happened here? Well, this particular location, Tal el-Hammam, is a favorite site for archaeologists and biblical scholars. The mound here hosts evidence of a culture all the way from the Chalcolithic or Copper Age, all compacted into layers as the highly strategic settlement was built, destroyed, and rebuilt over millennia. Here you can see a picture of researchers standing near the ruins of the ancient walls, with the destruction layer about midway down each exposed wall. Now, the significant part is there is a 1.5 meter interval during the Bronze Age 2 stratum that caught the interest of some researchers for its highly unusual materials. In addition to the debris one would expect from the destruction via warfare and earthquakes, they found pottery shards with the outer surfaces melted into glass. In fact, they were bubbled. Also mud bricks and partially melted building materials, which to the scientists were all indications of anomalously high temperature event, much hotter than anything the technology of the time could produce. They saw evidence for temperatures greater than 2,000 degrees Celsius, according to Kennett, whose research group at the time happened to have been building a case for an older cosmic airburst about 12,800 years ago that triggered major widespread burning, climatic changes, and animal extinctions that we know of as the Younger Dryas event. The charred and melted materials at Tal el-Hammam looked familiar, and a group of researchers, including impact scientist Alan West and Kennett, joined Trinity Southwest University biblical scholar Philip J. Silva's research in an effort to determine what happened to this city 3,650 years ago. And their research is published in the Journal of Nature Scientific Reports. And we're going to be looking at that paper. Now, there is evidence at this site of large cosmic airbursts close to the city called Tel El Hammam. According to Kennett, he said it would be an explosion similar to the Tunguska event. And I can agree with that because of the size and scale that we discussed just moments ago. It would seem a Tunguska-like event would be required to blow this building completely off the foundation and to melt the tiles on the ceiling, which is exactly what they are proposing here. The Tunguska event, a roughly 12 megaton airburst that occurred in 1908, when a 56 to 60 meter meteorite pierced the Earth's atmosphere and exploded over the eastern Siberian taiga. Interesting. Now, the shock of the explosion over Tal El Hammam was enough to level the city, flattening the palace and surrounding walls and mud brick structures, according to the paper. The distribution of bones at the site indicated extreme disarticulation and skeletal fragmentation in nearby humans. Now, for Kennett, further proof of the airburst was found by conducting many different kinds of analysis on soil and sediment from the critical layer. They found tiny iron and silica-rich spherules, which turned up in the analysis, as did melted materials. I think one of the main discoveries is shocked quartz. These are sand grains containing cracks that form only under very high pressure. Kennett said one of the many lines of evidence that point to a large airburst near Tel El Hammam is that we have shocked quartz from this layer. And that means there were incredible pressures involved to shock the quartz crystals. Quartz is one of the hardest minerals. It's very hard to shock. Now, the airburst, according to the paper, may also explain the anomalously high concentrations of salt that are found in the destruction layer. I believe we have a picture of that. So there's a high concentration of salt in the destruction layer. In fact, an average of 4% in the sediment and as high as 25% in some samples. Now, the salt was probably thrown up due to high impact pressures. According to Kennett, the meteor that likely fragmented upon contact with Earth's atmosphere may have been that the impact partially hit the Dead Sea, which is rich in salt. And the local shores of the Dead Sea are also salt-rich. So the impact may have redistributed some salt crystals far and wide in the air, and not just at Tel El Hammam, but also nearby Tel El Sultan, which is proposed as the biblical Jericho, which also underwent violent destruction at the same exact time, and also Tal Nimrin, also destroyed. Interesting. So the evidence is piling up by this team, just one after another here. Now, the high salinity soil that they found here could have been responsible for the so-called late Bronze Age gap. The researchers say in which cities along the lower Jordan Valley were abandoned, dropping the population from tens of thousands to just a few hundred nomads, because nothing could grow in these formerly fertile grounds, forcing people to leave the area for centuries until the rains washed the salts away. Evidence for resettlement of Tal El Hammam and the nearby communities appear again in the Iron Age, roughly 600 years after these cities were suddenly destroyed. Now, that brings us to fire and brimstone. Tal El Hammam has been the focus of an ongoing debate as to whether it could be the biblical city of Sodom, one of the two cities in the Old Testament book of Genesis that were destroyed by God for how wicked they and their inhabitants had become. One denizen, Lot, is saved by two angels who instruct him not to look behind as they flee. Now, Lot's wife, however, lingers and is turned into a pillar of salt. Meanwhile, fire and brimstone fell from the sky, and multiple cities were destroyed. Thick smoke rose from the fires. City inhabitants were killed, and area crops were destroyed in what sounds like an eyewitness account of a cosmic impact event. It's certainly a satisfying connection to make. Now, all the observations stated in Genesis appear to be consistent with a cosmic airburst, according to the team. But there is no scientific proof that this destroyed city is indeed Sodom of the Old Testament. However, the researchers said, the disaster could have generated an oral tradition that may have served as the inspiration for the written account in the book of Genesis, as well as the biblical account of the burning of Jericho in the Old Testament book of Joshua. And then that leads us to the paper, which we will cover in the second half in great detail. Now, before we get on with the actual scientific analysis and the details, there are going to be arguments against locating Sodom at Tal el Haman. There's also some questions arising from Retraction Watch, and criticism engulfed the paper, claiming an asteroid destroyed the biblical Sodom and Gomorrah. The same criticism poured in at the same time when the same authors were talking about the Younger Dryas event. And you'll notice some of the names from the Younger Dryas team and the Comet Research Group are on these papers. Ted Bunch, right there. Alan West, James Kennett. These are guys that were working on the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis in 2012. And when they were gathering data, they happened to find evidence at this location. Interesting. So the team here was working on evidence of cosmic impact at Abu Hayera in Syria and the Younger Dryas onset, and high temperature melting, which is greater than 2200 C. And they went to this location, Tal el Haman, because I guess some people had found some melt structures. And they literally found a city that was sheared off of its foundation. And a burn layer, a debris layer. It's like a mini Younger Dryas event right in front of them. So let's get on with the paper. The first of two. I just need to find the second paper. I could do that on the break. Let's talk about this paper, a Tunguska-sized airburst destroyed Tal el Haman, a Middle Bronze Age city in the Jordan Valley near the Dead Sea. And we'll read the abstract, and we'll let it soak in, and then we'll go over all of the scientific data after the break. Here's the abstract. We present evidence that in 1650 BCE, or 3,600 years ago, a cosmic airburst destroyed Tal el Hammam, a Middle Bronze Age city in the southern Jordan Valley, northeast of the Dead Sea. The proposed airburst was larger than the 1908 explosion over Tunguska, Russia, where a 50-meter-wide bolide detonated with 1,000 times more energy than the Hiroshima atomic bomb. A citywide 1.5-meter-thick carbon and ash-rich destruction layer contains peak concentrations of shocked quartz, melted pottery and mud bricks, diamond-like carbon, soot, iron and silicon-rich spherules, calcium carbonate spherules from melted plaster, and even melted platinum and iridium, nickel, gold, silver, zircon, chromite, and quartz. And there's more to come after the break, so stay tuned for more Boom.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.
Who owns you? If you're not in control, then someone else is. Join me, Ivy West, for Voices on the Wind, Saturday. I discuss government, health, metaphysics, suppressed science, universal mysteries, little-known incredible facts, alternative energies, and even more than you can imagine. There was blood on the wire. Won't you join us on Revolution Radio Saturdays for Voices on the Wind with me, Ivy West. There are lives in the balance, people under fire, children at the cannons. Because if your head's in the sand, your tail is a target.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the #1 listener-supported radio station on the internet. Please help support this station so this battle can continue forward. Revolution Radio!
Join me on the Brian Rouge Show on Revolution Radio, Eastern Standard Time, every Tuesday night from 6 to 8. We talk about the four most vital things, in my view, affecting all of humanity. Number one is UFOs and aliens and their agenda for the advancement of humanity. Number two is the Jewish establishment's control over all aspects of human civilization. Number three, the truth about Adolf Hitler, how he was the opposite of what we've been told. Number four is advanced ancient global civilizations. Join me on the Brian Rouge Show, Tuesday nights from 6 to 8 on Studio B on Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. The opinions expressed on this radio station, its programs, and its website by the hosts, guests, and call-in listeners or chatters are solely the opinions of the original source who expressed them. They do not necessarily represent the opinions of Revolution Radio and freedomslips.com, its staff, or affiliates. You're listening to Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, 100% listener-supported radio, and now we return you to your host.
And we're back where we left off at the half. We're going to go over the scientific data that the team came up with. And let me make sure you can see me. I can't. This is really working weird. Leah's not with us because she is flying towards Denver right now. She's headed out on a mini vacation. Going to go check out Top Knots Farm and visit a friend out there in Michigan. So it's good to see you all. Let's share the screen again and get right back into it. I know you guys wanted to see my mug there. So here is one of the artist's depiction of the Sodom and Gomorrah destruction of the city. We have several of the classics here for your perusal. And here's a blurry one. And that brings us to the paper. A Tunguska-sized airburst destroyed Tal el-Haman, a Middle Bronze Age city in the Jordan Valley. And we went off at the break talking about some of the things they found there, including melted platinum, iridium, nickel, gold, silver, zircon, chromite, and quartz. And heating experiments indicated that the temperatures exceeded 2,000 degrees C at the site. Amid the city-side devastation, there was heat of 2,000 degrees C. That is unbelievable. How do you reach those temperatures? The easiest way is a cometary airburst. Now, the airburst demolished 12 plus meters of the 4 to 5 story palace complex and the massive 4-meter thick mud brick rampart, while causing extreme disarticulation and skeletal fragmentation to nearby humans. It sounds like a mini Younger Dryas event, like the mammoths were ripped apart. Causing extreme disarticulation and skeletal fragmentation in nearby humans. An airburst-related influx of salt produced hypersalinity, inhibited agriculture, and caused a 300 to 600 year long abandonment of approximately 120 regional settlements within 25 kilometers of the airburst. Tal el-Hammam may be the second oldest city destroyed by a cosmic airburst after Abu Hurayra in Syria, and possibly the earliest site with an oral tradition that was written down in Genesis. Tunguska-scale airbursts can devastate entire cities and regions and thus pose a severe modern-day hazard. Well, kudos to the team for warning us. And let's get in. Well, here's the artist's rendition of what the palace looked like before the destruction, and now you can see it's literally sheared off completely to the foundation. The pictures show catastrophic leveling of the palace at they call it TEH. I like that. We don't have to keep repeating that. The artist's evidence is based on reconstruction of the 4 to 5 story palace that was 52 meters long and 27 meters high. So that is their first line of evidence. Amazing. We have the destruction of multiple stories of the palace in picture here. You can see the top of the debris, plaster, and a blowover, and then the palace. Destruction of the multi-story palace photo showing jumbled rubble of 4-story palace atop floor. Here's the floor here, the nice flat floor. In number 1, we see remains of debris from the upper stories on the floor. Number 1 represents broken mud bricks and debris from shattered upper walls. 2 and 3 are voids and layers formed when trapped textiles, rugs, and tapestries burned, leaving only fibrous ash and carbon. The blowover in blue is composed of wind-blown laminated deposits that sealed the ruined structure for 3,600 years. Beginning at the time of destruction, number 4 marks fragments of white limestone plaster mixed with carbonate spherules from the palace walls and ceiling. So just in this little cross section here at the site, which appears to be not more than 1.5 meters, all of the information in the entire story unfolds in the stratigraphy. And here we can see some more sedimentary profiles. So they had multiple locations around the site where they're finding the same type of things occurring, a destruction layer. So all the sampling profiles in all the areas investigated contain a burn layer that is highly complex and variable across the tall, but is generally composed of 3 parts. The first part is the deepest one and is mainly pulverized mud brick mixed with larger melted and unmelted mud brick fragments, melted and unmelted roofing clay, ash, charcoal, charred seeds, unburnt wood, burnt textiles, bones, plaster fragments, broken pottery, and melted pottery. And we'll call this the debris matrix. And it varies in thickness up to 1.5 meters and is only occasionally missing across the entire location. So the entire region. Some areas might have been sheltered, I guess is what they're talking about. They radiocarbon dated the destruction age, and all the ages are coming in very consistent at 1661 plus or minus 21 BCE. Now, I know a lot of you poo-poo carbon dates, but all of them are coming in pretty consistent here. And let's go look at some of the pottery. Or let's take a look at the entire stratigraphy here at the site. Multiple burn layers at Tal el Hammam. On the upper Tal, there are 3 terminal burn layers. One during the Middle Bronze Age, another during the Late Bronze Age, and one higher during the Iron Age, not visible here. Each burn layer represents the end of an archaeological period at the site. The dashed white line encloses the lower burn area at an arrow, representing the burning of a single building at 1400 BCE. Stacked atop the sheared MB2 walls, MBA floor marks the top of the MB2 floor beneath the 1.5 meter thick destruction layer dating back to 1650 BCE. So multiple burn layers. Interesting. Does that mean there were multiple airbursts at the same site? What does it say here? It says 2 earthquake-related destruction layers not shown are buried deeper than the floor of this excavation. Wow, so there's an entire devastating story of things happening here, one destruction after another. And this leads some scientists to start to question the narrative here. So let's look a little harder. Here is a destruction layer in the palace that they're claiming. Photo of an excavation in an interior food preparation area of the palace. Marks debris that was most likely deposited post-fire erosion. Number 2 points to a charcoal-rich dark layer indicating a major fire in the palace. Contains fragments of plaster and limestone spherules. And number 3 points to a cross-section excavated clay flooring. So they found some spherules there. They do some analysis of them. And then they also, in that layer that they're calling the destruction layer, found something called diamond-like carbon. And this diamond-like carbon was embedded in pottery from the palace. It's a pure carbon aggregate, likely a diamondoid cluster, embedded in a crater on the melted surface of the pottery. You can see here from the scanning electron microscope here, the crater, and you can see the diamondoid that blasted into the surface and fused there. It's pretty good evidence of a cosmic explosion causing this. The elemental map shows that the particle is composed of carbon with almost no oxygen or other elements, which is often referred to as a diamondoid cluster. I love that. That's a great name. Now, the discussion of diamondoids is key here. Diamond-like carbon or diamondoids are found associated with extraterrestrial impact events, but they are also found in hydrocarbon deposits in coal. Each diamondoid typically contains carbon atoms that are bonded, as in diamond, rather than they have different bonds, similar to graphite rather than diamond. Although diamondoids peak in the temple destruction layer, indicating likely exposure to high temps, they are also present at lower concentrations in all other layers. Now, they're claiming that this may be due to the reworking of the nano-sized diamonds, which are easily deposited by wind and water. But they are found in all other layers. So there's some more evidence against this team. Let's talk about the melted construction materials, because this is what was sealing it for me. They found a number of surface melted pot shards. about 15 meters northeast of the palace complex in the destruction layer. They were associated with numerous unmelted pot shards, but the melted ones are clearly melted in an extreme heat event here, causing bubbling. And it's only melted on the outside of the pot shard. The inside of the pot shard is unaffected, as if one side was exposed to the airburst, potentially lying on the ground, and was melted. Pretty good. That's some pretty good evidence there. There were also charred seeds and grains. The potsherds were mixed with a heavily chunked debris matrix containing charcoal, ash, pulverized mud bricks, more potsherds, roofing material, and fragments of limestone building plaster. No melted material was found anywhere in the city in younger or older layers spanning the 3,500 years. So that is compelling evidence that there was an event here, only one in all of the stratigraphy, that melted the pottery on one side. And there's almost no explanation for that. Smelting does not explain that, because when you look on the inside of the shard, it is perfect and it's untouched. It's uncharred. So it would have to be a very quick, very hot event to melt the outside of this potsherd. Now let's talk about some melted mud bricks here. These are melted mud bricks from the palace. On the upper surface of the mud bricks is melt glass, or a non-vesicular skin, almost like obsidian. And then the broken surface of the melt glass then display vesicular texture, similar to pumice. So the brick itself, the entire brick melted and had a glass surface on it. This is a very high temperature event. Scanning electron microscope images of highly vesicular surfaces of broken melt glass. There are bright metallic inclusions also in several vesicles. So more evidence of extreme high temperature. And again, the only melted products are at the 3,600-year-old layer. That's it. There was melt glass on melted pottery, on mud bricks, and roofing material. Melt glass was from 3 sites. There was no melt glass found in the wadi, and none was found above or below the destruction layer. So all the melt glass corresponds to the same time in the stratigraphy, and there is no melt glass above or below 3,600 years ago. Pretty good evidence here. And the reason they're saying this happened is because the top of the roof was blasted by the airburst as the building collapsed. This is a typical roof construction of the palace with a clay brick roof, and the melted clay and the vitrified clay would be the top surface. Absolutely fascinating. Fragments of melted roofing and clay exhibiting 2-millimeter diameter tubular holes left after incineration of straw. So you can see where, well, it's just fascinating. You can see where the wood beams were. And they were completely burned out because it was 2000 C while this was melting. It's like a fossil of the beam. And then we have plant imprints in melted roofing clay from the palace. And this would be how they would have had thatch on top of the clay bricks, perhaps. Again, imprints of silicified plant material. Pretty fascinating. And then there's more evidence here. The directionality of mud bricks, potsherds, and grains is tipped over with a northeast image. So there's like a blowover. The way that they're strewn out suggests that the cairn shielded the floor to the northeast. And the area at the top labeled blowover is evidence that strong winds sealed the deposits with wind-blown laminated material, including pulverized mud brick, charcoal ash, and fragments of white plaster. The draping over of which indicates debris traveled southwest to northeast. So they have lots of evidence here in this paper. There's also high velocity effects. There's evidence of high winds in the stratigraphy. And there's directionality to almost everything at the entire site, suggesting that something blew up over here and the direction of explosion went to the northeast. And then there's the shock quartz grains. You can see this lamella. You see these lines? You typically only get that in high pressures and temperatures, explosions. And I've seen this in cross-section. This is maybe what normally quartz looks like here, more amorphous. But when you get these lines that are parallel lines mean shocked quartz. FF, that's the direction of the force. 3 micrometers between parallel lamella. This, in my opinion, would be a shock quartz if I saw it in thin section, but we're about to show you that because of this picture here, some petrologists, because these are non-parallel, see how some of them are at different angles? Yeah. Clearly here they're parallel, though. This is clearly shocked quartz. This Pallas piece, this is less shocked because it's less parallel. But definitely some parallelism in some of these grains, specifically this one. So that's all the evidence. Now, all the evidence was produced, and then as soon as it was put out, they got attacked. They got attacked in a big way. Hey. And then the author had to do some corrections, and they did their due diligence. They corrected all the pictures by adding all the context that they were attacked for. And it was very telling because when I looked at the first criticisms here from Retraction Watch, they begin with ad hominem attacks. It's interesting how scientists attack each other. They don't go in and attack the data. They go in and attack the person. They say, well, this guy is a biblical scholar, so clearly what does he know about cosmic impacts? Well, he's just one of the scientists out of a team of dozens. Here, let me read you an example of this. Shortly after the publication, Mark Boslow, a physicist at Sandia National Laboratories in New Mexico, and a fellow of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, took to Twitter to raise several concerns about the article. Boslow pointed out that his model of asteroid airbursts is cited as the mechanism by which God smote the evil city. He didn't like that in the paper, that sentence, because it's biblical. He noted that the senior author of the study, Philip Sylvia, an engineer, theologian, archaeologist, and the director of publication at Trinity Southwest University, is an apparently unaccredited evangelical school located in a strip mall in Albuquerque, whose motto is flexible adult higher education, upholding biblical authority. Now, Silva earned his PhD from Trinity Southwest in 2015, which means very little, but he's still allowed to be on a scientific team. And the fact that he has a church in a strip mall has nothing to do with the scientific rigor of the paper. It's just funny how they attack who people are. They don't attack the work. They go on to say other members of the research team are affiliated with North Carolina State, Northeastern Arizona, Elizabeth City State, New Mexico Institute of Mining and Technology, and the United States Navy. They also accuse the team of photoshopping images, which the team says is categorically false. It's he said, she said in science these days. It's absolutely crazy. And then another team published a response. This is from Jarrett and Harris a year later, that there is no mineralogical or geochemical evidence of impact at Tel El Hammam. And they went to discount every single piece of evidence that they talked about. They said that their shock quartz is shock quartz, but it's not from a comet, it's from something else. Yet, how do they know? They said the geochemical data present is not adequate to confirm the presence of extraterrestrial material. Yet, the presence of the extraterrestrial, the presence of the geochemistry proves that it could be from an extraterrestrial source. Again, another he said, she said. That's basically how science works. If you have competing theories, you're going to be attacked. And if you don't have any data or science to back up your attacks, you attack ad hominem. You say, well, it could be something else. It could be, could come from somewhere else. Could have been a nuclear explosion. We don't know. And then there's arguments against locating Sodom at Tel El Hammam. This is geographical and biblical evidence. And this piece was originally published by Professor Todd Bolin on Bible Places blog. The proposal that Sodom has been found on the northeastern side of the Dead Sea has been around for a decade or so. But with the publication of an article by Stephen Collins this month, it will receive the widest hearing to date. I thought it might be helpful for readers of Biblical Archaeology Review to know where to go for another perspective. The proposal that Tal El Haman in Sodom is Sodom fails on at least 2 counts. And these are helpfully summarized by 2 experts in their respective subjects. The geography fail. According to Bill Schlegel, professor in Israel for 25 years and author of the Satellite Bible Atlas, he explains why the biblical text does not fit the geography of Tel El Hammam. There's also a chronology fail. Eugene Merrill, distinguished professor of Old Testament studies at Dallas Theological Seminary and author of Kingdom of Priests, A History of Old Testament Israel, shows in a recent Artifacts article that for Tal El Hammam to be Sodom, one must deny all of the biblical dates before the time of Judges. One final point. The excavator of Tel El Hammam insists that by identifying the site as Sodom, he is supporting the historicity of the Bible, when in fact, if his theory is true, we cannot trust the Bible for accurate details about times and places. And Tal El Hammam is certainly a significant site, but according to this author, Sodom is surely to be found elsewhere. Now, I would like to make one final point. I don't think we can trust the Bible for accurate details about times and places. But the stories themselves may be mythologically accurate. Just like it said in the paper, that the story of what happened to Tel El Hammam might have been used later to describe a different catastrophe in a different place. And it might be this recurring theme, the biblical flood, the end of the world, that dates back to a very, very early time. You see, if you've been listening to this channel, it's become quite clear that there are major cosmic catastrophes that affect Earth at regular intervals. They don't have to affect the entire planet. We know about Burckle crater impact in the Indian Ocean, which corresponds to the right time for the biblical account of the flood in Genesis. And it would have only affected the regions around the Indian Ocean with giant tsunamis. More is to be revealed. History is not a mystery. It's a cosmic catastrophe. And that's a boom. Be safe. We'll see you next week. We love you.
Listen to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, and we'll be right back after this message.